That is where we're going to start the show this week. Sunday night, Jonny Clayton reclaiming the green jacket, beating Josh Rock 8-6 in the final to win the Austrian Darts Open. A lot to unpack from the weekend. It was her first Euro Tour final for Josh Rock, who whitewashed Michael van Gerwen 7-0 in the semi-finals. But what were your biggest takeaways from the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with the two players in the final. Let's first start with the final itself. The first 8 legs of that match, they were each averaging well over 105. I mean, Josh Rock was averaging 106 when he was 4-0 down to Jonny Clayton's 110, or 4-1 down. So he was playing out of his skin, and it wasn't enough. He got himself back into that match. They both, their averages actually fell a little under 100 for a little in that match, but in the end, they both averaged just over the ton, and it was just a high-quality final. Jonny Clayton was the better player throughout, and you know what? He was the better player throughout the weekend. His match against Damon Hedda was absolutely brilliant. He overcame Jelle Clausen in a tough match in the second round. Last leg decider broke the throw. Yes, Jelle had a bad final leg, but Jonny Clayton was clinical throughout that, and he was clinical for most of the week. Not as brilliant as he was in the final, not as brilliant as he was in the third round, but he was clinical, and he hit at the right times. And that's why he was able to win a second green jacket, was able to win in Austria for the second time 5 years on. Josh Rock, as you mentioned, his first Euro Tour final, first semifinal even. He had lost a handful of quarterfinals before this weekend. Yes, he was fortunate. He had a resurgent hometown Mensur Suljovic, but resurgent might be pushing it. He was awful in that match against Peter Wright, but won. He wasn't much better against Ricky Evans. He was brilliant against Michael Smith, the world number 1, to set up that match against Josh Rock. But Rock hit that 116 out, and from that point on, there was no coming back for Mensur, and then to whitewash MVG. MVG didn't even have a darted double until the 5th leg of that match. He ended up missing 8 from that point on. But Josh Rock took it to Michael van Gerwen early, and yes, MVG had a chance to get back into that match, but he made too many mistakes, made all the mistakes. Josh Rock didn't make any. And he has now emerged, and we'll come back to Josh Rock later in the show, but he has now emerged as a player who in any venue, in any type of match, is someone to behold. And, yes, that match against Mensur Suljovic wasn't his best, but it was probably his toughest, going against the hometown person. And to be able to hit when he needed to with the crowd against him was really impressive. But as I said, we will talk about Josh Rock in a bit, so I'll leave it on that. As far as other things from the week, I'll be remiss if I don't mention the refereeing. In particular, one specific moment in Andrew Gilding's first match. Gilding, of course, in the seeds for, I don't know if it's the first time in a very long time on the Euro Tour. His match against Matt Campbell, and early on, he thought he had left tops. If you counted up all the scores, he had left tops. If you looked at the scoreboard, I don't mean the one on television, although that one as well, but the one that the markers had on the stage in front of him, it said he had tops. But Russ Bray had miscounted and said that he had 80. And if you go back and listen to that leg, every score throughout that leg, Russ Bray had in fact called correctly up until he said in the penultimate vision, Andrew, you acquire 161. It should have been 121. That's what it said on the scoreboard. That's what all the scores had been. And then after he scored 81 to set up, thought he set up to leave tops, the next visit, Russ Bray again said, Andrew, you acquire 80, even though the scoreboard said 40 and the correct score should have been 40. Gilding hit tops, but Russ Bray did not call game shot. If you look at the rules, all scores and subtractions made should be checked by the referee, the marker, and the players after each throw when practicable. This should be done before the player's throw commences. That's Rule 5.4.5. Rule 5.4.6. Errors in arithmetic shall stand as detailed on the scoreboard unless corrected prior to the next throw of the player whose score is in error. Any error in the score can be corrected by the referee at any time until game shot is called in that leg. That last part is key because Russ Bray could in fact correct the score even after the next throw. 5.4.9, the actual score required by a player must be showed on the scoreboard clearly visible at board level in front of the players and the referee. 5.4.10, the referee shall act as an umpire in all matters pertaining to these general playing rules when conducting a darts event and shall, if it is necessary, consult with scorers and other officials before announcing any decisions during the course of match play. Reading all that together, what Russ Bray should have done was consult. At the very least, consult when everything else said 40 and the scoreboard, which is the official score, said 40. Instead, all he said was, I called that you require 80 and ordered them to change it to say 80. Didn't change which score was wrong. Just said change it to 80. He did not consult. Everyone else on there was confused. Andrew Gilding was obviously perplexed because he thought he had won the leg. But Russ Bray, instead of consulting, trying to figure it out, went with what he said was the score, even though everything else did not add up to that. He did not consult in a situation that clearly it was necessary to him at least to consult to figure out where the difference was. Russ Bray did not follow the rules of darts, let alone that it was a miscount. Mistakes happen. A referee at least needs to follow the rules and be sure that he knows the rules. And the fact that he didn't is a black eye on that match and a black eye on this tournament. The PDC deserves better and it should be investigated. And I hope the PDC investigates it because we as fans and certainly the players should and do deserve better.
You're absolutely right. And I think Andrew Gilding, in his interview afterwards, said he was miffed. And I think it takes quite a lot for him to be miffed at anything. So we love ourselves a Burton DeWitt rant. And just my thoughts on the weekend itself. And I've got to say, I think the 7-0 jumps off the page straight away for me. And I'll be honest, I was away at the weekend, Sunday evening. I was in London for the Football League Awards. Friend of the show, Andrew Sinclair, kindly offered me an invite to go, and the awards finished at around 10 o'clock. And I said to him, let's see who won the Euro Tour, because we weren't following it during the event. And we were going through the live scores page, got to the semi-finals, Josh Rock 7, Michael van Gerwen 0. We couldn't believe it. And you saw the reaction from Josh after he won that 7th leg, completed the whitewash. He turned to Michael van Gerwen with a look of, did that really just happen? And as you say, we're going to come on to talk about Josh Rock more in our next question. So I'll put him to one side for now. But away from that, the final, Jonny Clayton getting back the green jacket. We asked him on the show a little while ago about the first one that he got in 2018. And he said that he needed to get it framed. I don't know what he's going to do now that he's got 2 in the collection. It is a first Euro Tour title for him since 2018. And you mentioned about that first win that the Ferret had on the Euro Tour on the show recently when we were talking about 100 Euro Tour events and how pivotal that weekend was for him. And you think of all the success that he's had since then, and he's now only doubling his Euro Tour tally of titles. And it looks like he is coming back into some form. We saw him in the Premier League winning those back-to-back nights. He's still in the playoff spots. And as you went through there, he had a tough run of games. Jelle Klaassen beating him 6-5, and that was just to make the final day. And I've got to mention the win against Damon Heta, because it is something that I did manage to see over the weekend, that 106 average and the 1-6-1 finish to win it. Damon Heta turning down the ball for a 1-2-1 to level it up at 5-all. Jonny Clayton steps up, takes out the 1-6-1 to win it 6-4. It was, I'm not sure if Damon Heta is going to do the same thing next time. We know percentages wise, we've had Christopher Kempf on the show, that it is the best option to do. But when that happens to you, maybe you'll think twice about doing it next time. But aside from that, we had the handicapper's nightmare, Daryl Gurney, getting to the semi-finals, a good run for him. And he has been qualifying for almost all these Euro Tour events this year, coming through the qualifiers, but the draws have been pretty rotten for him. He's had Stephen Bunting twice. He had him again at the weekend. Andrew Gilding, I think he's had. Gabriel Clemens in there as well. So some tough draws that he's had in the first round of these events. And he wasn't at his best over the weekend. His averages were around the low to mid-90s for the most part. But he got the job done, and he beat some top quality players. He beat Andrew Gilding. He beat Danny Noppert, Stephen Bunting, Luke Humphreys, the top seed. And there were some fairly comfortable wins in there. And okay, you can look at the opponents and say they were nowhere near their best, and I'll mention that again in a moment. But those games can be hard to win, because when you've got nothing coming back at you and you are expecting a hard game, you've got to put that to one side and get the job done. And as I say, that's what Daryl did for the most part, and almost made it to the final in the end. And just lastly, a word for Mensah Suljovic. It was his home event. He got in as the highest ranked Austrian player on the tour and beat Peter Wright, a game that I didn't watch, but I don't want to watch after looking at the averages there. But got to say, he showed his class the next day, the 97 average to beat Michael Smith 6-2 in the last 16. And okay, it's not as frequently coming out every single time as it was in the past, but you can see that Mensah on his day, he's still capable of beating the top players.